Okay. It looks like we are live. How is everyone on this Friday? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, and for today's brief live stream, we're going to be talking about where to find and how to isolate GPU accelerated effects in both Premiere Pro and After Effects, as well as how to determine the bit depth that you're working in your projects, especially if you're working between After Effects and Premiere. And if you don't have those bit depths set correctly, what that can mean in terms of banding and the types of artifacts that you may get if you're using or doing any kind of very sort of deep color grading or using things like vignettes, and maybe you've got content that's coming over from After Effects via dynamic link. You export, and for some reason, everything looks good, but when you're doing a fade up from black or fade to black, you're seeing all this banding, all this artifacting and pixelization, and what's causing that. So we're going to cover that today real briefly. So as always, great to see you here. Thanks for joining me on a Friday. Couple of quick shouts to Russell Underhill. Hello. Keith Owen, how you doing? Rogelio, so great to see you from Mexico. Mozaga. Aniket from India. Hey, Desiree, coming to us on Periscope. Ryan Monroe from Oklahoma, how's it going? All right. Happy midsummer, yes, to all of my friends in the Nordics, in the Nordic region as well, Scandinavia. Alex, how are you doing? Oh, exactly the topic you've been looking into. Great. Brian Taylor from Scotland. How's it going? Okay, terrific. Craig, what's happening? Ambreen and Robert from Brooklyn, the Adobe Whisperer. Thank you very much. All right, so let's go ahead and kick right into it. And as always, we'll save questions to the end. I should be able to go through this relatively quickly. Always with detail, but that's okay. All right, so first and foremost, GPU accelerated effects. One, why do you want to use those specifically? Well, for obvious reasons, not all effects are GPU accelerated. However, whether you're on Mac or Windows, whether you're using CUDA GPU style acceleration or OpenCL, or on the Mac OS, Metal, by using effects that are GPU accelerated, it's going to allow you to have better real-time playback, faster rendering. If you're leveraging these things in conjunction with things like preview files, you can really speed up and optimize your workflow from ingest to export. And yeah, I mean, that's it. It just makes things faster, and it makes kind of the experience, the UX of working inside the app better when things are just performing better. So in Premiere, if we go up to the effects menu, now keep in mind, of course, that your menus may be and panels will be in different locations. I'm in a modified version of our editing workspace. Under effects here, we've got three little indicators. Now, this is nothing new. This is, again, sort of a refresh stream for Friday refresh to see, hey, maybe I haven't recognized these things or I've forgotten about them. So at the top of the effects panel next to the search field, you've got three radio buttons here. The first is accelerated effects, 32-bit color, and YUV. So we're going to first deal with accelerated effects. So if you're looking for what effects are GPU accelerated, because as mentioned, it is not all of them, if you click on this button, this will now show you all of the effects native to Premiere, as well as any third-party effects, right? So because we have this open ecosystem for plugins and our open API, a lot of our plugin developers are developing 32-bit accelerated effects. This is where you can find that stuff. And anytime you see this icon, this is telling you that those effects are in fact GPU accelerated. So as you would imagine, things like the Lumetri color effect, right? That's actually an effect being applied. It's our panel, but it's an effect nonetheless. That's all of that is accelerated. This is showing you all the various LUTs here, and we have dozens and dozens of those. Let's get into some of the other effects. So things like extract, levels, Gaussian blur, sharpen, invert. Again, there's Lumetri color you can see there. Our lens distortion effect. So if you're trying to fix, lens distortion, or you are working off of wide-angle lenses, or leveraging something like a GoPro. Again, having that effect accelerated is really going to improve your scrubbing and real-time playback performance. If that weren't accelerated, well, when you're doing things to kind of modify the view of a wide angle, it's sort of heavy processing. If you're going all on the CPU, it's just going to make the playback less smooth, and it's just going to have to force you to drop your fractional resolutions down even lower. So in this case, you might get full You're probably going to be able to get half, and perhaps you'll get even, full, or you'll have to move it down to a quarter. Really dependent on the system and the content you're working with, but you get the idea. What's up, Caleb Gregory? What's up, Kush? The Adobe one. I laugh every time. It's the best, one of the best Twitter handles ever. Okay, the black and white effect, etc. So, and you can see, of course, all of our immersive video effects. Anyone who's working with VR in After Effects or Premiere, these two are GPU accelerated. Now, having said that, let's go over to After Effects here. And if we go up to Effects and Presets, well, you might think, okay, how do I find them? Where are those buttons that I'm looking for? Well, we don't have the buttons in the same place. But something that was added, I think actually just in the April release, although it may be before then. We do so many updates and so many little intermediate updates because of Creative Cloud. That's the nature of being able to update. I can't remember exactly when this feature came in, but this is super useful. How do you identify what effects in After Effects are GPU accelerated? Because we've added so many in the last couple of versions. If you click on the flyout menu here inside Effects and Presets, towards the bottom you will see that there is an option here to show GPU capable effects only. All right. If you click on this, and by the way, if you haven't gone in here in a while, I'm going to start twirling all these things down. There are an enormous amount of effects in After Effects that now take advantage of the GPU. And I'm just going to twirl them all down here, all right, so you can get an idea. There are many, all right. At one point, I want to say even like 2 releases ago, there were maybe 10 or 12. So all of these, directional blur, fast blur, Gaussian, sharpen, invert, set matte, brightness, contrast, color balance, all of your various color correction ones here. There may be a few that aren't. Lumetri color, of course, same as we have in Premiere Pro. The new updated video limiter, which was also added to Premiere. A couple of distortion effects, fill and gradient ramp, that we showcased a couple of versions ago. I remember doing some streams on that. Once again, all of the immersive video effects. Fractal noise, super important. This is another one of those. Fractal noise, commonly used effects in After Effects. Prior to a couple of versions ago, not GPU accelerated. What did that mean? It meant that there was a lot more preview rendering having to happen, because it was just, there was no other way to really see things. Now, being GPU accelerated, you can take advantage of things like our uninterrupted preview in After Effects, where you can be caching frames and previewing, playing back, and make a change to fractal noise, and it keeps going because it's GPU accelerated, all right? Drop shadow, linear wipe, Venetian blinds. I'm glad we accelerated that one. That's entirely up to you whether you use them. Use them responsibly. So again, it's in the flyout menu of Effects and Presets. Show GPU capable effects only. Super necessary, super useful to know, because not all of them are GPU accelerated. All right, super cool. Now, that's GPU accelerated effects. What about 32-bit effects? And this kind of segues into working and deciding the bit depth that you're going to be working in. Now, for many years now, I'm just trying to find a nice little frame. Oh, there's a nice one of our little elephants right here. Okay. I've always talked about how Premiere, when you're working in Premiere Pro, and this is really since CS5, since the dawn of the Mercury playback engine, by nature, you are working in a 32-bit float container. So back in the day when many of our competitors required transcoding to be able to get something like DSLR content into a 10-bit or 12-bit format, to even be able to be editing in that larger bit depth with greater latitude, I would talk about the fact that, hey, listen, Premiere doesn't care. You're always in 32-bit float. So you take 8-bit content, you throw it in the timeline, you are working in 32-bit float. You don't have to convert. It doesn't matter if it's ProRes 10-bit or some other 12 or 14-bit format. That doesn't actually matter. Premiere is always working in 32-bit. And when you start adding effects, you want to make sure that you're using 32-bit effects, because if you don't, then you won't be theoretically working in 32-bit, and actually your export will be an 8-bit export. Even if you have that maximum bit depth box checked, you mix and match effects in the Premiere timeline, you're going to be working in 8-bit. Case in point. So let's go up to, once again, effects up here. We're looking at GPU accelerated ones. Let's just go and highlight 32-bit color. And once again, this applies to third-party as well as our native effects. And you can see it's not quite as many. So this is really essential because, again, if you want to keep everything in the highest quality possible, even if you're working with DSLR content or H.264, H.265 compressed content, If it's in the timeline and you leverage 32-bit effects and then you export to an intermediate, something like Prores or DNxHR or GoPro Cineform, you're going to maintain and be in this greater than 8-bit space when you export to that format. You're not degrading that original 8-bit H.264 content any further. We can't recreate anything that was lost at the sensor in your camera, okay? So we're not converting it in some way, but the fact is that you're always in this open container in Premiere, so you're being able to take advantage of some of that higher latitude without clipping certain elements, again, as long as you maintain 32-bit effects throughout the entire chain. So if I were to apply something like our Luma corrector, or again, the three-way color corrector, or Lumetri, or our Luma key, or any of these other things, Gaussian blur, all 32-bit, all good, okay? Now, where this gets complicated is when you're working between Premiere Pro and After Effects, and that is the bit depth and banding part of the title of today's stream. So in this particular comp timeline here, you can see that this footage that I was working on of the elephant here, this currently is actually a dynamic link into After Effects. That .aep, and it even says linked comp, this was a dynamic link that I set up here in Premiere. So again, I was working on footage, right-click, replace with After Effects composition, and then that establishes that dynamic link so that anything we do in After Effects to this content will be reflected here inside the Premiere Pro timeline. So that's what we're actually looking at. So let's go over to After Effects now. Okay, same footage, same everything, same look, same color, same effects applied, whatever it is. And in this case, I think there's just some Lumetri on there, okay? All right, now, banding, okay? I've got a little vignette going on here, all right? And maybe, again, this piece of footage I have fade up from black. And I go to render this out, and suddenly what was once very beautiful and sharp and crisp and very, very HD, because this was HD, it wasn't 4K at the time, I'm starting to see pixels. I'm starting to see blocks. It's very blocky in that when it fades to black or fades up from black. Why is that happening? You just said everything is 32-bit. Well, this should be fine. Liar. No. It's because, by default, After Effects is not necessarily going to be in 32-bit. In fact, I'm not entirely sure because it's been a while since I've done a completely clean install. I think it defaults to 8-bit. So it's just a matter of changing that. Now, what are we really talking about here? So let's take a look at a quick timeline that I have here. This was put together by my buddy Max Hagelstam in Sweden, a fellow Adobe employee. And this showcases to you what happens if you have an 8-bit dynamic link unintentionally versus a 16-bit. So you don't even have to convert, you don't even have to change to 32-bit floater in After Effects. As long as you're in at least 16-bit, you're not going to hit these banding issues. Now I got to zoom in probably so that you can see this over the stream, but this is beautifully illustrated. What does that banding look like? What is he talking about? Well, when you're in 8-bit, if you leave After Effects in 8-bit and establish that dynamic link, this is what's going to happen. Particularly, you're going to see this in your shadows. You can still see it a bit in the white area, but it's really as you get into the grays and blacks that you can see, oh yeah, I've seen that before. I've encountered that before. That sucks. You don't want that. It's just a matter of switching the bit depth in After Effects. Here's the 16-bit result, and you can see a little bit of the side-by-side right here. Notice 16-bit, smooth. This is the expectation. But if you don't change After Effects to 16-bit, this is what you're going to get, okay? So how do you change it? It's real simple. In the project panel, got a couple of ways to do it, just like you always have multiple ways to do things in all of our applications. Easiest way is, I think if you just, is it Option, Alt Option, and click on the bit depth selector right here at the bottom of the project panel, you can move between 8, 16, or 32. And again, you really only need to be in 16-bit, and there are reasons why you may want to be in 32-bit, but ultimately to avoid those types of banding issues, particularly with content, as I mentioned, where you're going fade to black, fade up from black, vignettes, and many other things. Again, if you're using a lot of effects that have a lot of shadow detail or particles and things, you probably want to be in 16-bit. You can also access that setting by this new little rocket icon here, where you can choose your video rendering. So in this case, again, talking about GPU accelerated effects, we can use Metal, I can use OpenCL, or I can say just use software only. That's going to be the slowest, the least performant. So in general, again, based on your OS, at a minimum, OpenCL on the Mac, Metal's really good in the latest version. And if you've got an NVIDIA card with CUDA, you'll see CUDA in there as well. But up here, if we go into color, this is where you can also choose your bit depth, 8, 16, 32. And if you need to modify your working space, Premiere Pro by default, working in Rec 709, here's where you can access all of those as well, okay? So you will want to do that, again, if you're establishing those dynamic links. Now, again, the other thing to keep in mind, you've got all of these 32-bit effects. You can see all of these. You can see some of them are just 16-bit, like offset right here. So what if you have a favored effect that's 8-bit, okay? Well, here's the thing. You can actually get away with using 8-bit in After Effects if you set the comp to 16. However, depending upon what it is, you may potentially still see some banding there. So ultimately, you really want to be in effects that are 32-bit float. Similarly, if we're back here in Premiere Pro, let's say I were to take something like, let's just grab I'll just grab the fast color corrector. I'm going to drag it onto this giraffe here. All right. So again, at present, everything is still using 32-bit. We've got our comp linked in at 16-bit. We're good to go. But then I decide, oh, yeah, you know what? I want to use some old school thing here. I think some of the noise. Yeah. So we have like noise and grain and dust and scratches generation in Premiere. These are like really old school kind of legacy effects. If you want to do good dust, scratches, noise, grain, Red Giant has plugins for that. You can even, there's tons of overlays that you can buy. If I were to drag this on here or double click and drag this on this clip now, this is an 8-bit effect. So that basically kills all of that higher bit depth glory that we were working in. You'll still be able to see it on screen here, but when you're exporting, everything's being dumbed down to 8-bit. So you want to maintain a 32-bit effects pipeline if you want to maintain the highest bit depth throughout the process, okay? Now you might say, okay, well, you're working in 32-bit, that's great, but you're exporting to H.264, which is 8-bit anyway. Why does it matter? Again, because through the pipeline, the conversion from working in this 32-bit space to an 8-bit codec, yes, we get that. We understand that. We know what to do. We'll preserve those pixels so you don't get that messy, undesirable looking banding. It's when you inadvertently drop an 8-bit effect into your timeline here, now you're dumbing everything down. Now, even if you were to go to GoPro Cineform, you're gonna have potentially some weird banding artifacts. So that's really the key, is to make sure, if you want to maintain highest bit depth possible, if you're going to be doing some pre-production work, maybe some grading, maybe something else, maybe you're treating clips that you're handing off to someone else, you want to make sure that you're using 32-bit effects, And again, if you have no effects, there's no effects applied, it's just footage. It's a combination of GoPro and DSLR and mirrorless, and it's all 8-bit footage, but we're going to export to DNxHR or to GoPro Cineform 12-bit. Is that a true 12-bit file? Yes, it is. We're not degrading the original. Again, we can't fix, blown out highlights from a DSLR on an H.264 file. We can't do that. We're just not going to degrade it any further. And you're still going to have the benefits of greater latitude when grading that content, particularly if you've flattened it out in here. And then when you go to your intermediate codec, it's just going to preserve what was there coming right out of Premiere. It's going to look great, and it's going to be nice and clean. All right? So that's GPU accelerated effects, bit depth, and banding, and what to be aware of between After Effects and Premiere. All right, so now let's go over to our chat and see if we've got any questions. And if not, I will send you on your way. I'll be back a little bit later today. I was hoping to stream on the Creative Cloud channel, and Facebook was just not letting me for whatever reason. So maybe we'll revisit that there. All right. Okay, Alex. Is there a reason other than file size to operate in lower bit depth? Again, performance-wise. So what I can tell you is when I'm often doing stuff in After Effects, I will, just for, again, speed of preview, naturally, if you're working in 8-bit, things are just going to be a little bit faster, right, in general. So I'll often do, I'm working going between the 2 and 8-bit, but before I render, I make sure I switch it to 16-bit. That's really kind of the key. So in general, and if I'm doing something that doesn't really matter, that doesn't mean you have to be in 16-bit all the time. The quality will be better though. So 8-bit's going to be a little bit more performant by nature. 16-bit's generally always going to give you a better look. All right. Gershom Akisma, show more. Okay, well, if you have a question, otherwise you can go back and watch what I just showed. All right. Let's see what we got here. All right, Pau from Spain. Hello, Travis Cruz. Bhavya. Hare Krishna from Lena Bhagavad Gita. Oh, very nice. Hello. I was just listening to George Harrison this morning, as a matter of fact, speaking of. Jay, how are you from the Philippines? Eden Levy, hello. Justin Lewis from Florida. All right. Anthony Izzo, looking to buy a new machine tower for Adobe Premiere to work on, open to Windows or Mac. Are there specs online recommended, and is it the same for AE and PS? We definitely have specs online, and they tend to sort of hover around minimum requirements. This is a very general statement that I'm going to make to you, and of course, a lot of it has to do with what are you doing. If your main work is Premiere, or even Premiere and After Effects, but sort of motion graphics and editing, and let's assume you're kind of in the 4K world, generally as your standard. RAM-wise, you really want to be at a minimum of 16 gigs. That's fairly light by today's standards anyway, right? This main machine that I'm working on here, my iMac 5K, 64 gigs of RAM. It's wonderful. I wish I could put more in this one. This is a 2-year-old machine. But that's a good place to be because all of the applications, including Photoshop, as you ask, all have a shared RAM architecture. So if you go into the, I think it's in the, here I can just do it for you so you can see where it is in Premiere. If you go into your preferences under memory, this even shows you here, based on what you have installed, of course, that, AE, Premiere, Prelude, Media Encoder, Photoshop, and Audition all share that memory. You can control how much is in use when the app is in focus versus how much you're reserving for the background. And in general, ratio-wise, you can see I'm leaving, a little more than 10% here for the background. That's a pretty high ratio. 6 gigs is pretty good for the OS and for things just when there's nothing else going on. At a minimum, you kind of want about a 70-30 ratio is what I've found, just for best performance. That varies, by the way. That's not an absolute, but you don't want 50-50. That's not going to work super well. And I generally optimize for performance versus memory here. You can see different results in different platforms, to be honest with that, but performance is generally what I'll stick with. So minimum 16 gigs of RAM. Processor-wise, again, if you're doing 4K, you're doing some basic MoGraph, or maybe you're doing VFX, Core i7, Core i9, multiple cores. Speed-wise, they're all pretty fast now. I wouldn't go much below 2 gigahertz or something, but most of your upper processors are 2.6 and above. And then have, a sizable video card with a decent amount of dedicated VRAM. This particular machine, I've got 8 gigs of dedicated VRAM. Again, that's pretty good. When you're looking at, particularly if you're on Windows and working with NVIDIA cards or external cards, some of them now 16, 32, 64 gigs, 128 gigs of dedicated VRAM. That's amazing. And that's where leveraging GPU acceleration, you're really going to feel it. You're really going to see a difference there because all of that is just completely taken out of the CPU. All right. All right. Tamika Scott, hello. Let's go over to the periscopes here. Calum, all right, looking for a new monitor. What brand or spec would you recommend to concentrate on? That's a great question, Calum. To be honest with you, because I'm not using any third-party monitors at present, I'm a little out of it in terms of the latest and greatest. I know the big trend now is with these super wide, super high-density screens. I think LG makes some. Dell has a couple of really nice ones. If you hit me up on Twitter, I can pass along some links for you. One of our former creative residents, Sarah Dici, actually, I think she's done a couple of vlog videos on YouTube about this. Terry White, my colleague as well, has talked about this kind of stuff before. So I can send you some links. I don't know offhand. Again, depending on the kind of work you're going to do, obviously, there's like those HP Dream colors. They're 10-bit. Now that all of that is supported in Mac OS as well as on Windows, if you're going to be doing grading, if that's kind of your thing and you're in the right environment, you want a monitor that can handle that. The iMac screens are great, and now that we have a bit of display color management in Premiere, it also ensures that what you see there will look right elsewhere as well. So, and that's a new add as of last October, the display color management. Gina Kazenberry from North Carolina, how are you? Mark Collins, Stan Arthur, as always, great to see you. Gene DePaula, I noticed in Adobe Premiere when I output to H.264, if I fade from black at the beginning of a sequence, the resulting video shows artifacting during the dissolve in and the few frames or so of the video. This video is talking about After Effects, but is this the same thing you're talking about? I get around this by moving the sequence to about a second into the timeline. It has a second or so of black, but does this resolve the issue? So again, Gene, if you're seeing that banding, two things. One, it can also depend on, if the footage underneath is not super clean and properly exposed, in particular H.264, there may be some of that present at the source, right? So if it's in the source, there's not much we can do about that. Now, again, if you're seeing that when you're just doing a basic, cross dissolve, fade up from black, are you using a mixture of 8-bit and 32-bit effects? That would be my first thing. Because potentially, if you are, that's what's going to cause that issue. You'll see here, if you go into let me switch back so you can see it. And again, this could also be the type of dissolve that you've chosen. They are not all 32-bit, but they are not all GPU accelerated. So here we are in Premiere. So cross dissolve, dip to black, dip to white, film dissolve. These are all 32-bit and GPU accelerated. I'd be surprised if you're using additive dissolve, but you can see not a 32-bit effect. Morph cut is also not 32-bit. Non-additive dissolve is not 32-bit. And if you're using other third-party ones, it's possible as well. But in general, if you're doing a standard cross dissolve, or like I use film dissolve a lot, shouldn't see any of that banding. H.264 though, it can be problematic, right? It's super compressed, and depending upon what it was recorded, where it came from, you can at the source, you can experience that. On some of this footage of my own, I had some examples of that and was, to put it mildly, super pissed. I was really upset, but that was how it was captured and just had to deal with it. Joshua, what should I export in? H.264 or Apple ProRes? Well, Joshua, it just depends on what that export is for and where it's going. If you're archiving and you want the highest quality master possible, ProRes, GoPro Cineform, DNx HR. It's just going to look better. It's going to preserve those original pixels much better. If you're going out to YouTube or you're going out to share to some other service, H.264. YouTube now and Vimeo and others, they actually will accept, I think they'll accept ProRes now and other formats, so that when you upload, before they transcode, they've got a higher media source. Frankly, I haven't noticed a significant difference in terms of their encoding. But so that's it. It just depends where you're going and what you're doing with it. If you're going to be showing it off or broadcasting or making a final to share, H.264, H.265 would be the way. It's just going to be infinitely smaller, and it's going to look really good. It's compressed versus something like a ProRes or DNx. All right, Beaufort Williams, nice to see you. Hey, Stephanie Reed. Now working on a film plus 8 other projects. Wow. I was just seeing a comment from some of my MoGraph friends asking if in general in the community if work is down, and several replied that, yeah, it's down a lot. Your workload never seems to be down, Stephanie. I think you need to start farming some of that out. I don't know. You are super busy. Klaus Franson, my vignette disappears when rendering timeline. So Klaus, I'm not sure what you mean by that. You mean that you're just not seeing the vignetting from Lumetri anymore? that is surprising. I can't say I've seen that. Hugo Vega, is there a way to identify whether an effect is a legacy effect 8-bit in Premiere After Effects? Yes, so I just showed you that. So again, under effects, if you just highlight 32-bit, this will show you all the 32-bit effects. All right. If you don't have that highlighted and you go into video effects, let's just go into color, because yeah. So wherever you don't see that 32-bit icon, all right. So ASC CDL 32-bit, but brightness, contrast, change color, change to color, channel mixer, color balance, HLS, equalize, leave color. These are all 8-bit effects. So don't use these in conjunction with Lumetri if you're trying to keep everything, you know, in a greater than 8-bit domain. And again, especially if you're going to be going out to something like a compressed file format, because if you start with 1, you're basically working in 8-bit from that point on. Okay, and in After Effects, similarly, when you do your search on your accelerated effects, it'll show you the bit depth there. All right. Back to YouTube for a second. All right. Is there a list of recommended hardware for 16 32-bit workflows? I don't think so, Alex. Again, you know, hardware, it really varies from machine to machine. And, you know, the key is, like everything, you want a good, fast system. You want fast disks, right? I'm using a couple of SSDs. No lie, no surprise, that makes a really significant difference, right? SSD media. So, you know, faster, lots of RAM, dedicated VRAM, but it really depends what you're doing. You know, if you're working in doing a lot of stuff for, you know, the web or that's meant to be sort of 720p, 1080p, you really don't need a supercomputer, right? But if you're doing those same things and integrating, say, 3D models and Cinema 4D or Maya or something like that, you know, and you're working in 4K, 6K or 8K, the requirements for performance and for just experience are certainly going to be higher. So I wish I could give you like a definitive answer, but you know, it varies. Is Adobe moving towards processing more in the GPU in the future? Absolutely, and that's why you're seeing more of that come to After Effects all the time. And dual GPU support. Now, if you mean can you use multiple GPUs, actually in this latest release of Premiere, as of April, now you can. So yes, you can take advantage of multiple GPUs, which is awesome. And that's new as of April. Okay. Ryan, will I be teaching a class at Adobe Max this year? Great question. Actually, for the first time in a while, no. I have declined teaching because I have a bunch of other things that I'm doing at Max this year. So unfortunately, sorry, I won't be teaching any courses at Max this year. Maybe next year. All right. All right. So Gene's saying you've used the cross dissolve. Yeah, you know, Gene, again, it could be something else in the source. Maybe it's another effect that you have on the timeline that's not 32-bit. I'd verify that. You know, if you're using one of the classic older color effects you just saw, they're not all 32-bit, so it could be. All right. David, recommendations for AVC HD original for large screen delivery recommendations. Are you talking about format-wise? So like if you were going out to DCP or something like that, would be my first thought. And if you're doing like giant screen, I can't remember what the limitations are with ProRes and DNX. Those are becoming more and more common. All right, for large screen delivery. Okay, back over here. All right, and over here. And that looks like it. Okay, perfect. Well, hey, great engagement, great questions. Thank you for being so present. I'm going to quickly refresh, grab a bite, and then I'll be back in about an hour or so, give or take, doing a little bit of, I think I'm going to do some more. I like to do audio on Fridays, so it'll be something audio related. I don't know what yet exactly. That's the nature of live, though. It's in the moment. All right. So I hope you've enjoyed this stream. Again, you'll be able to watch the replay, whether on Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, or YouTube. Have a great rest of your weekend wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.